All right, next up we have classes. So we've been working with classes for a while. We have things like a pandas data frame is an object class. A list is an object class. All the different kinds of types that we've been working with. Anytime you type type, that is giving you a class of objects. And when you create a new class, you can also create instances of that class. So one example is everyone here has a laptop, right? And so you each have your own laptop, and that is an instance of a laptop. But they're all laptops, right? They all have a screen and a keyboard and probably a trackpad, and they open up like a clamshell, and they need to be charged, and they have an internet connection. These are all attributes of a laptop. But you don't all have the same laptop. You each have your own instance of a laptop, and it has its own unique features as well. So this is kind of how you can think about classes. You have instances or tokens of that class, and you have the class itself, which is a type. You can also have classes which inherit the properties of other classes. So we'll see this in a minute. You can think of this as maybe you have a Dell laptop or a Mac laptop. So all Mac laptops have certain properties, right? All Dell laptops have certain other properties, but they all inherit the properties of a laptop. So this is kind of a class which inherits properties of its parent class. In philosophical terms, I like philosophy, so we call this the type token distinction. You have a type of something, and then you have the token, which is the actual physical thing that it inherits properties from. So whenever you create an object in Python, it's going to inherit the properties of the class that it comes from. And kind of tying this back to modules, when you import a module, you can import some of the classes that might be defined in that module. We didn't have any classes defined in our previous example. We just had functions that were defined, but you could have classes as well. So let's see an example here. So we're going to do we're going to save this as another .py file, and it's going to be called my class, and it's going to it's going to take as its subject this object. So what this is this is the object class. This is kind of like the mother class of Python. So any class will inherit the basic properties of a Python class, which comes from this object class. And then within that, we're going to define this init function, which takes as argument self, which is the class that we just defined. And when we use this init function, we can do things like assign attributes to that class. So every instance that we create is going to have this attribute walrus, which will be this string. We can also, in our class definition, we can define a function. So here's a function chew, which also takes self as its argument, which means these don't need any other arguments. It just takes itself and then prints out this other string. So let's go ahead and copy this text, and then we're going to go back to our text editor, whatever you prefer, and I'm going to paste that. And then we're going to call it myclass.py. So we want to be in our lessons folder here. It's going to be myclass.py. It's important that you name these the same way I am, because otherwise, if you import them with the different spelling or punctuation or capitalization, it won't work. Okay, so we've created that class, and now we're going to go back to our terminal. We've already got a IPython session here, so we can do import my class. So what we've done is we've just imported this module, but instead of defining functions at the top level, we're defining a class, and then that class has some functions that we're defining within it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an instance of that class. So we're going to type Paul equals myClass dot myClass in capitals. So this is, first of all, the lowercase myClass is the module, and then that has within it an object, which is this class object, myClass. And so we're going to create an instance called Paul. So Paul is now a variable that we assigned to be just a generic instance of this class. So if we type Paul dot tab, and we can see we have these two options, chew and walrus. So if we type walrus, we're going to get this string. So this is from this init statement. It just gets stored that value string, that attribute. We also, if we type Paul tab, we have chew. If we just type chew without the parentheses, it says this is a bound method, myClass.chew of myClass object. So this is what happens when we have a function and we don't put the parentheses. It just says this is it's called a bound method. It's not been run yet. We're just seeing what it is. So if we actually want to run that, we need to add the parentheses. And now we're going to get this second quote printed. If you don't like the Beatles, you're probably really confused right now, but these are Beatles lyrics. So if we wanted to create a second instance of that, we could easily do George is, and now George has the same attributes. So this is a very simple example. We'll see some more interesting examples a little bit later, but this is the kind of thing you can do with a class. So you instantiate or create a class by calling the class like it's a function, which is what we just did here. And when you do that, when you instantiate that class, Python does a few things. So it looks for that class and sees that you've defined it. It creates an empty object that has all the functions that you defined using def. It then looks to see if you used an init function, which was up here, and if you have, it calls the function, that function, to initialize your newly created object. And this also gives you this extra variable self, which you can use it to set variables on it like you would with a module or dictionary. So in this case, you can set self.walrus to a song lyric like we did above. So we should be able to change this to another lyric. Trying to think of a good Beatles lyric that I could put in here. We can do so now we have changed the value of this attribute. So just like if we want to change the index of a panda's data frame, we can use that index attribute and then assign something to it. We can. This is this attribute walrus of a my class object that happens to be called George, and we've renamed that attribute to something else. So yeah.
Purpose of object. Like, is that something that always has to be in there?
Yeah. So it is possible to leave this blank and just put an empty parentheses, but depending on which version of Python you're using, it might not behave the way you expect. So this is just kind of basically it inherits kind of the fundamental features of a class. That's about the extent of my knowledge on the object, but yeah. So that will just kind of ensure that you know this code will run on different versions of Python. So we can see another example here. We're going to create this other class called Song, which will take some lyrics and then print those lyrics, or have the ability to print those lyrics. So we're going to go to create another new file, save this as song.py. And so what this one does is it first creates this, well, we're going to define this function which will take the lyrics that were defined up here in this init function and print them. So when we, in this case, when we create the object, when we initialize the object, we have to pass a second, or actually just a single variable. So self refers to itself. So this is not something you pass to the class, but you need to pass lyrics to the class. So you, if we do this time, we're also going to do this from module import star or import all. So we're going to import that module, and then we're going to let's see if this works. We're going to copy this text. We're going to create some lyrics. Let's just make sure that works. Yep. So these dots are just telling Python, hey, I'm doing another line. You can also do, if we just copy this first part and then hit enter, we'll get basically the same thing. So these dots kind of get ignored in this first example. Okay, so one of these is a Beatles song, the other one is another song, and we can now create we can now instantiate the song class with a song object. So we're going to say song1 is song using lyrics1, and we can do song2 is a song with lyrics2. So we then type song1 dot. We have two things now. We have this attribute lyrics, so we can have a look at that. This is just the list that we passed, just as it is. But it also has this function print it, which will doesn't take any arguments, just takes itself. But then because self refers to the object itself. So self has this attribute lyrics that we defined here, and we just saw that we have it. So it's going to take self.lyrics, which is that lyrics attribute, and print it. So it's just as if we typed print lyrics1 here, although it didn't format it the same way. Oh, right. It's as if we did this. So if we did, it's as if we did this. So this is kind of not a very useful example, but it's a simple example, so you can kind of see how the information is being stored and passed between these different functions within your class. So play around with this kind of stuff, and I think you'll get the hang of it. And we'll do an example in a minute.